Great, we're going to get started here. Hello, welcome in, everyone. We have, unfortunately, our guest had to cancel for tonight, so we're here together, and I'm going to engage in a conversation around systemic racism. Welcome to Kale and Deshna and Marisol. Hope I've said your names correctly. I'm just getting us live into the Facebook, and just here we go. Let's see if I get this started. Feel free to put in the chat where you are listening from, what part of the world, what part of the country. My name is Misha Safran, and my co-host is on the East Coast and had a very long week, so will not be with me this evening, but I am delighted to continue the sustainable actions that we've committed to, which is to host these webinars, to be with you all. Richmond, California, you're just my neighbor. I am in Martinez. I want to make sure that you all have permission to post in the chat. Let's see, panelists can chat, attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, so you can use the Q&A, or you can use the chat feature. So welcome in, and going to start in just a moment as people kind of roll in. Let me just check my Facebook for a second. Okay, welcome, welcome. We've got some people here from Richmond, California. Go ahead and put in the chat where you are, and I'll be monitoring. I'm going to be doing everything. So I'm going to be looking at my monitor over here and looking over here, because my co-host is on the East Coast and they had an 8-hour driving day. And so my dear sweetheart is not going to be able to join us in the webinar this evening, but y'all are here and I'm excited to have you. So feel free, again, use the chat feature and just send a chat message to everyone here that says where you're zooming in from. I won't do a full hour tonight. It'll probably just be 30 minutes because I'd love to just turn off the recording and the live stream and bring you all in to have just a real good conversation with each other. So while I'm waiting for people, I've got Claremore, Oklahoma, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is in the house. Welcome to all of you. So glad you're here. I'm wondering, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Oh my gosh, Oklahoma. Are you the students that signed up for this? I know there's some students that signed up for this evening, so I'm really excited to have you. So yes, okay, cool, great. Wonderful, well, welcome. I would love to hear from you in the chat what you are studying and what brought you to this webinar and how you found out about it. I will be offering a survey at the end, so hopefully people will stay on to fill that out as we're starting to gather more and more information. We've been doing this for 3.5 years now. So the disappointing news is that my guest had to cancel. They had a conflict with getting their children to an event, and so they were not able to be on and drive at the same time. I was like, yeah, no, please don't. So hopefully they'll be back in December. We do have another guest in October I'm very excited about, Victor Small. And if you haven't seen all of the other webinars, please go to my YouTube channel. They are all there. I think we have 37 webinars since 2020 with amazing, wonderful, fabulous people. So let me just start. And nurse and found the webinar at Eventbrite, social work major. And we are doing a group project for our culture diversity course. Love it. It's just my name, Misha Safran. The YouTube channel is Misha Safran. So I'll put that link in the chat too. You can subscribe and watch all the previous videos. Last month, we had a dear friend of ours, Earl Sims. He was in prison for 22 years, and he was a survivor and a thriver as a result of restorative justice. So delightful to have interviewed him last month, and that is now up on my YouTube. It took me a while to get it there. So what I'd like to start off with, which I always start off with, is just, first of all, welcome to all of you. This is probably the first webinar in 3.5 years I've done by myself. So I miss my sweetheart, but she'll join me next month. I start with a statement that, all land is Indigenous land. And I am currently on the Karkan Ohlone land. Welcome to those of you just joining us. Just starting with the introduction now. All races, genders, cultures, abilities, sexual orientations, you are valued here. You are accepted here. You are seen here. You are heard here, which means all voices. And so the challenge is, I say all voices with love. Okay, this YouTube, Facebook / webinar on Zoom was not created for the purpose of arguing with people's experiences, but to just create a space where people can share their experiences. And in this case, this webinar, this topic, a candid conversation about systemic racism, is just that. It's a conversation that I usually have with my co-host and a guest that allows that person to, perhaps where they've never been able to before, share how they feel about the system and how it has ongoingly, continuously, constantly, consistently not made it possible for them to have the same opportunities as those who carry advantage and privilege. So we also like to say that this is a safe space. And so as a group, you and me, and when we have a guest, we work together to keep things confidential. What you learn here can leave here. What you hear here typically stays here, especially what I'm talking about is from the attendees. Okay, so yes, this video is live. It's on Facebook. It will also be on YouTube. But when people in the attendee list, those of you who are here, and I will never say your last names, but if you have anything that you want to share in the chat, then you can say in parentheses, don't say this out loud. It'll just be for the people in the chat and me, and that's fine. Also, I am a person who identifies as lighter than some and darker than others. My guests are usually identifying as Black, Brown, people from the Indigenous lands, and then, which is all of our lands, and then people of color, African American, Asian American, people describe themselves and identify themselves in a lot of different ways. So when they come on to my webinar, I ask them before they come, how do you identify? Because I don't want to misidentify them. And that's another tool that you can use as you're speaking with people. How would you like me to, what terms do you use to identify yourself so I can respect where you come from? Another part of that is learning people's names, right? And of course, we have that in another area of our lives, not misgendering people. So for example, I use she, they pronouns. If you would like to have pronouns next to your name, you can do that, I think, on your chat feature. I'm not sure in webinar if that's possible. But learning really to be where people are. And in doing so, we create a safe space. And what that means is not comfortable, but safe. So they're not synonymous, right? Safety and comfort don't mean the same thing. Safety for me, the way I define it, is that we allow people to be able to share who they are, be who they are, and we are here non-judgmental. We are here with love and compassion and care. Discomfort, not everybody, especially our BIPOC brothers, sisters, and friends, because again, she, they pronouns, they, them, our BIPOC brothers, sisters, and friends, many of them don't have that opportunity to say, oh, I'm going to open my door and walk outside and I'm going to be comfortable. It's not a normal, easy, automatic thing. Okay, those of us with lighter skin, white presenting, white passing, white, and again, those are all social constructs, white, Black, etc. But those people, white passing, white presenting, white, have a lot more access to comfort and the choice to choose to be comfortable than those people who are darker skin. And it's just a fact. So when I talk about a safe space, all the things I talked about is so that people who are in here can land softly. And I took that term, whether it was created by her or not, I still attribute it to Sonia Renee Taylor. And you can certainly go to her Instagram. She's a fabulous one to follow. but the notion that we are creating a space where people can land softly. Okay. So I want to just share a moment, the reason, the purpose for this webinar, and I'm going to read it because even though it's in my heart, we've changed some terms around to meet the diverse needs of our audience. So I created this webinar with my partner. Well, she'll always say, oh, but Misha created it, but that's okay. We created this webinar to engage in authentic and honest conversation about the long-time injustice of racism in America over 400 years. Yes. During the webinars, we discussed systemic racism in an effort to dismantle white supremacy, otherwise known as white crimes, white violence, white hatred, from the inside out. So we discover what's inside, what people have been through, and we hope to carry this forward by sustainable action. And I'll talk more about sustainable action later, but one of the things that I do as sustainable action is I host these webinars every month. Our intention with these webinars is to participate in sustainable action and highlight the voices of BIPOC community members, again, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Or you can also say BIPOC, Black and brown, Indigenous people of color, giving them a safe space to be heard about their own experiences, challenges, and hopes without the need to educate white people. And to provide resources to increase your ability, those of you attending here, those of you on Facebook and on YouTube, we provide resources to increase your ability to self-educate towards being a more learned participant in the social justice movement. So a lot of people ask, well, what does it mean to become more learned? And I'd be curious if you want to go ahead, this is going to be interactive today, if you'd like to go ahead and put into the chat. And hopefully some of you, if those of you that are here together that we're using the Q&A, help each other find the actual chat mode if you can, because that's where I'm going to be able to focus the most. I'd love to know from those of you attending this webinar, whether you're here on Facebook or YouTube, what do you see as ways in which you can become a learned participant and in a sustainable way? What are things you can do that are sustainable for you to be a learned participant in the fight against social discrimination, racism, etc.? And I'll give you a moment to go ahead and put that in the chat. I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say. And I'll check Facebook to see if people are commenting there. Okay. So go ahead and let's see what we've got here. I know you're thinking. I'll give some examples. Yes, Rachel, how would you educate yourself? Haley, evolving the conversation in a healthy way. Oh, I'd love to know what healthy means, because it's really important. These are great, wonderful. So educating yourself, yes. Oh, thank you, Marisol. Marisol, is that how I pronounce it with the l? Okay. Be open and willing, yay. Thank you. Be open and willing to listen to the experiences of people who experienced racism. Yeah, because, it's their experience. We're not here to disagree and argue with it. You're not going to tell a slave they weren't a slave. You're not going to tell my cousin who had numbers on her arm that she was never in the Holocaust. I mean, she was in the internment camps. She watched smoke rise up and her mother and father lose their life. So you were not arguing with people who were slaves or who were captivated and endangered and traumatized and tortured. We're here to listen, and it's uncomfortable. It's painful. I don't know if any of you are highly sensitive people or empaths. It's painful. I am not a religious Jew, but I am in pain watching what's going on in Israel and Palestine and Gaza. I care for my Palestinian friends. I care for my Jewish friends. I'm not going to argue with anybody's experience. I'm going to listen, and it might be uncomfortable. And so learning to be uncomfortable, and that I like what you said, Haley, about evolving the conversation in a healthy way. What does healthy mean, right? There has to be a healthy for me as a listener, and there has to be a healthy for the person who's speaking, right? And educating yourself. How do you educate yourself? I'd love to see what you've come up with. Obviously, one is to be in this webinar, to be in the classes that you're taking. I'm reading a book called Can't Talk About That at Work. Oh shoot, I've already forgot her name. Oh, here it is. Mary Frances Winters. This is one of her books. We Can't Talk About That at Work. It's a great great book. I'm also reading, sometimes I listen to books. I'm also reading this, Black Fatigue, also by Mary Frances Winters. So a lot of different ways, right? And some of the resources I will give you at the end of this is we've got a huge Google Doc that has documentaries, Black owned businesses, Indigenous owned businesses, nonprofits, articles to read, books to read, local bookstores that are owned by BIPOC, and also all of the guests that we've had so far that asked to have us promote their business, they're on there. So there are consultants, there are authors, there are trainers and coaches. There's a spa here in Martinez, Inside Out Spa. They were our guests one month. So as we kind of dive into what are things you can do to educate yourself. Oh, thank you, Allison. Learning about cultures other than your own. Yeah, both about how culture was impacted by racism and how those cultures were sustained despite racism. Love that. Absolutely. Yeah. And, thinking about, I just put a post out on Facebook and LinkedIn. It was a little bit too long for Instagram, but we're working on that. I realized so much of what's going on in the Middle East is because of ancestral trauma, right? And there was slavery and there was injustices and there were so many things that people haven't healed from, right? Similar to our country here in the United States, slavery and bringing people over against their will and discovering the Americas. Give me a break, right? They were already discovered. People were living here. So, but being willing to learn about other cultures. One of the reasons why I love languages, I learned French and Spanish, and I can go to different countries and I can speak and be with the people in their culture, in their language. And I'm trying to learn some other languages too, but a little harder. So so thank you, Allison, for adding that in. So several of you who responded to RSVP to this webinar had brought in some different topics that you were interested in. And because my guest canceled, I thought, well, let's do this. Because typically you will gain what you're looking for through the stories and experiences of our guests, as opposed to it being like a lecture or, a lesson, so to speak, as far as like content specific. It's really coming from what they share, and you get to kind of go, oh, wow, they really said. I had Robin was a guest of mine, Robin Spence, I think, you'll look it up. But she had an experience where she was in the grocery store. She's from the UK and she was pregnant, and the cashier looked at her belly and said, oh, not another one. Yeah. These are stories, these are experiences people are having every day, and not just 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Today, we've seen it. We've been seeing it all in the news, right? Now that we have the largest access to social media and media we've ever had, we are going to see everything that I just froze a little bit. We're going to see it all. And it's hard. It's hard to digest. And some people get desensitized, kind of like those people who love to watch horror films. They're desensitized to it. I cannot watch a horror film. In fact, there was maybe 10 minutes of horror in a movie that I watched with my son and his fiance last night, and I'm still having bad dreams about it. So it's about being willing to be uncomfortable. And this is not a movie. This is real. This is real life. So I created a slide to kind of go over systemic racism. And I guess what I'll do is I'll share the slide and we can engage in some conversation and some questions. But I would really love to hear what people's thoughts are as we go through each thing. So let me see if I can do this. Desktop 2. Okay, hopefully y'all are seeing my screen. If someone could type yes in the chat so I know, that would be really awesome. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So I kind of pulled this together last minute because I didn't have a lot of notice. She was able to tell me last night that she couldn't be here. And I was so disappointed because I really am looking forward to introducing you to her. So there's a lot on this slide. We're just going to go through it little by little. So first of all, what is it? What is systemic racism, right? So it's also known as institutional racism, and it refers to a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural norms, and other structures work to perpetuate racial group inequalities, right? So there's a constant perpetual motion of inequity, 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 not equal, okay? And this form of racism operates within various societal institutions such as government, education, healthcare, criminal justice, housing, job market. And this is where I get the pit in my stomach. These are all such important parts of our living, our existence, and they are all of them are touched on or even inundated by racism, by injustice. When you think about the government, right? We know that we've had issues with law enforcement, right? We know that even in government, I was doing some trainings with the National Institute of Health as a subcontractor. And even in those groups, people were sharing that they didn't have the same rights as other people, even at the same level. And they were working to find ways to collaborate and to connect. But there were barriers, big time, and continue to be. Education, healthcare, these two are so important for all of us to be able to thrive, not just survive. So many people in our system are surviving, and some just barely. Why can't we have a place where we can all thrive? Well, because our education, as you know, in the United States is starting to change again, with people saying, oh, no, don't read about that. Oh, don't tell people about that. Oh, definitely don't talk about that. Because what's going to happen? They're going to believe the truth. Healthcare. Where is it? We've got so many people, especially who are Black and people of color, so many health issues because of their trauma, heritage, ancestral, passed on down, the stress, the anxiety, the trauma, can't think of the term, violence. I was thinking beating up. That's not the term I wanted. Violence that has impacted these people time and time again. They are definitely going to have more health issues than those who don't go through all that, or whose families didn't go through all that, right? So when you look at all of these, there are some key characteristics. But let me pause there. Can you all think about, I'm going to stop the slide for a second. Go ahead and put in the chat. Oh, thank you, Allison. Yeah, the trauma is, it's ongoing. I mean, if you just think about people in the last 50 years with their own PTSD, I will say very honestly and openly, I'm a sexual assault and date rape victim, survivor. That's the word I'm learning is survivor. And I have trauma. And there are the slightest things that will set it off. So imagine people who have even more trauma that's backed up and backed up and backed up and has grown to such a level that it's festering inside. And then something goes, poke, boom, it explodes, right? And like, it's going to be crazy. And most time people get in trouble for it. I had a dear student at Clayton Valley High School where I taught who was shot and killed in Vallejo when he was no longer a high school student. He had a tiny little knife and something was wrong. He was not doing well and they shot him. But if they had taken a moment to explore his history and what was going on for him and the trauma, he would not be dead today. He was not endangering anybody. He wouldn't even have killed a fly. He's such a sweetheart. It breaks my heart. Sorry. Actually, I'm not apologizing. It's important to feel the feelings. When you think about those of you who are here in attendance, when you think about the government, education system here, at least in the United States, some of you might be from elsewhere, especially those of you on Facebook and YouTube, healthcare, criminal justice, housing, the job market. What do you know already? Go ahead and type in the chat to be an injustice. What do you know already to be inequitable? Go ahead and put that in the chat. And sometimes one person will put in the chat something, another person will go, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't think about that. So that's why it's really great that you are all participating in the chat tonight. What's an inequity that you already know to exist? And maybe you are someone who's experienced some inequities. Feel free to put that in the chat. And if you have to do a quick little Google search, go ahead, because you want to know, right? That's why you're here, you're learning. Yes, immigration status related to healthcare. Absolutely. Harsher punishments for people using a public defender in most cases. White men often running corporations, police brutality. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you think about education, right? The school to prison pipeline. If you act out or you use the wrong tone with me, you're in trouble. You're out of here. Right? Well, what about people who have that face? I'm not going to use the word, but the resting, face. They probably are not mad. They're probably not going to do any harm. They're probably in their head thinking about something. Yeah, Kale, racial profiling. Absolutely. Right? When you think about it, when you get in the elevator with somebody and they're not kind of the same as you, how do you react? How do you react? How do you respond? What does your body do? Right? It's natural, normal for all of us to have like some instant bias or prejudice or even, racial profiling, discrimination, because it's ingrained. We've grown up with it. That doesn't mean we automatically then, because we're not responsible for our first thought, we're responsible for the second one. Okay. So as you have this thought, being able to identify, oh, why am I thinking that? This person is probably just fine. In fact, they are. They're in an elevator with me. So really identifying, yes, Rachel, pay wage gaps, absolutely. So identifying what inequities are already taking place, being willing to say it out loud, there's an inequity here, right? That's a small step, but it's a step nonetheless to dismantling systemic racism, acknowledging, not throwing it under the rug, right? So let me go back to the slide. And thank you for that, everyone. So let's talk about the first characteristic, structural inequality, right? Systemic racism creates and sustains disparities in opportunities, outcomes, and resources among racial groups. These disparities are often built into the very fabric of institutions and may not always be explicitly discriminatory, but they have a disproportionate impact on specific racial groups. So if you think about what we were just talking about, someone said pay wage gaps and white men often running corporations, right? There was, and maybe some of you have heard of this, there was a study on resumes and the names on the resumes and how those who had more African-based names were less likely to get interviews. Yeah, it's ingrained in the system, that disproportionate impact to accessing even an interview, right? So without even looking at the qualifications, ruled out by your name. Yeah. So you may have had those experiences, you may not have, you may not even have been aware of that. Look it up. It was a resume study. I wish I could remember the name of it. Sorry, that's not, I tend to be more of the realist person than the researcher person, like as far as what I remember. So you can look it up and you'll find it. I won't take credit for it, that's for sure. I know where to give attribution when I remember the name. Anyways, keeping this casual and as easygoing as possible. Historical roots. Systemic racism is often rooted in a history of discrimination and prejudice. Duh. But not duh, because, we think there's no history if we don't talk about it, right? That's why people are trying to say, no, don't teach that in the schools, right? Policies and practices that were once explicitly discriminatory, such as Jim Crow laws in the United States. And there's a great book called The New Jim Crow. If you haven't read that one, that's on our resource list. Make sure you read that one. Have left lasting effects even after being officially abolished. Because really, what does that mean, officially abolished? It just means that it was announced that you can no longer do this, but is it really happening? Sure. We've seen all of the discrimination and racism coming out from under the ground, right? People being much more vocal and intense and hateful. I mean, we've been seeing that with the Trump and his following. Yeah, I said the Trump, didn't I? Anyways, okay. And also another characteristic is ongoing impact, right? So systemic racism persists and continues to shape the life experiences of racial and ethnic minority groups. It can result in disparities in areas that we've already talked about, right? Education quality, right? Employment opportunities, access to healthcare, and treatment by law enforcement. Intersectionality. Curious, I'd love to kind of see if y'all know how to identify your intersectionalities. Love to have you put that in the chat. Systemic racism can intersect with other forms of discrimination, such as sexism, homophobia, further compounding challenges faced by individuals who belong to multiple marginalized groups. And so let me pause there. With intersectionalities, you know, we can say, one, for me, I'm a woman. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, right? I'm Jewish. I can say I have a degree from a university. I have 2 degrees, actually, a bachelor's and a master's. So in those different places, they intersect. And in some, there'll be discrimination, prejudice, judgment, and in others, there might not be. But we come to this meeting place, right, where you have a Black woman, and then you have a Black gay woman, and then you have a Black trans woman, right? And then you take in the lower socioeconomic background. That person now is getting quadruple the negative impact, the quadruple, if not more, right? Injustice and inequity. So when we think about how people are impacted because of those intersectionalities, it's much more intense, right? The more you intersect there at that place. So be curious, what are your intersectionalities? Go ahead and put them in the chat. And this is how we can often also identify power and privilege, right? So when I was working for another organization, we had a white man say that he had absolutely no clout whatsoever. He was at the bottom of the totem pole. And so identifying his power and privilege was really hard for him. But the fact of the matter is, what he had to identify was he was white, he did have an education, he did have a job, and so he might not be able to get these people or even his people a raise because he's not in management, but he can raise his voice. He has power to raise his voice and speak the truth, right? It doesn't mean that he's not suffering trying to pay his bills. So identifying who you are in the system, who you are on this planet, and what your advantages are, and how you can use those to make a better impact in areas where there are people who don't have that privilege or advantages, right? Let me go back. I'll pause for a second, see if there's some thoughts that any of you have. And if I've missed something, please add it to the conversation. I'd love to read what you have to say. And those of you on Facebook, I can't read your comments right now, but I'm with you. I'm here and I'll answer them later. And if you're on YouTube, you know, do hashtag replay and you can see what's going on for you. But yeah, I'd love to know, those of you who have maybe never explored intersectionalities for yourself, you know, where do you have advantages? College degree. Yeah. Yay. In what? What did you study? I think you're one of the fast typers. I'm a slow typer and I'm a slow reader. Oh, that's right. You said you were a nurse earlier. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Okay. White and American. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Gay, mother, Native American, white passing, educated, law enforcement officer. Okay, Mexican, Italian. Yeah, yeah. So y'all can understand, you know, and actually even thinking about it, the person who said white and American, there could be an age, right? If you're a white American, but you're younger, you might not get listened to as much as somebody who's white American and older, right? So there are a lot of different ways in which we might get shut out, and there are a lot of different ways in which we might get brought in. And so being able to, and I see Mexican, Italian, being able to bring in who we are in a way that kind of helps us make a better impact rather than sit in, oh, I can never do anything about racism. And the other thing is, there's a huge conversation around, am I a racist? Are you a racist? People get very defensive about that. Being a racist doesn't mean you're a horrible person necessarily. It means that you're participating in a system and accepting and acknowledging and receiving all the benefits and privileges of that system and not saying anything about it. Not doing anything about it. Not identifying, highlighting, and working toward dismantling those inequities. It's the definition of a term. And it's not that it's necessarily your fault that you became a racist, but if you stay in that mode of not doing anything, then the name sticks. Now, that's my own opinion. That's what I've been working on myself. Good question. How do we dismantle those inequities? So one is speaking up about it, right? Being truthful, even if it might mean when somebody else should be getting a raise instead of you, saying, hey, can we talk about what's actually creating this hierarchy, or what is the process for these raises, so that we can all understand how each of us can get a raise, especially when you're thinking it's being a raise. Like I was working with a woman last March who was she identified as a Black woman. She was working for a nonprofit. She loved it and she didn't want to leave. But a new white male cohort joined the nonprofit and started at $10,000 higher than she did. Same experience in the field, except for the fact that he was new to this organization and she wasn't. So we worked together on helping her as a Black woman. She should have had to, but helping her raise her voice and say, I deserve this raise as well. And so if you're that white person and you came in at this salary, if you were to know, sometimes people don't know, right, that this person is not making as much, part of dismantling those inequities is saying, out of curiosity, are there any other people in this organization who have my same qualifications who are making less than this? It's scary, isn't it? Ask the question. But I feel like, and this feeling, this is not going to be based on research. I feel like the more we get honest, the more we challenge those difficult conversations, the more we're going to be able to maneuver through them. And I don't mean skirt them, like work with them to build something that becomes more equitable for all. Now, obviously, if someone has more experience, that's different. If it's truly experience-based, that's different. But if it is clear that it's a racial inequity, you have to ask yourself, what would I lose by bringing this up? What would I and others gain by bringing this up? So that's just one answer to the question that you asked in the chat. How do we dismantle those inequities? And I'm not an expert. I do a lot of work in this area, but I'm not an expert. So that's one of the answers. Let me just look at my slide and see if there's something else I wanted to. Okay, so let's actually finish the last slide and then we'll go into that, because that is the very next slide. Marisol, thank you for that. She's my transition friend. So another characteristic of systemic racism is unconscious bias. And again, we all have it. On the resource I sent to you after the webinar, there is the implicit bias test that Harvard created. By all means, it is not perfect, but it could be helpful in identifying some of your biases. Everyone has bias, okay? But they can influence decision-making, okay? And then disproportionate negative outcomes. So it will result in racial disparities in areas like income, wealth, education, with incarceration rates, right? Health outcomes and housing opportunities. So they can have incredible, as we know, 400 years, but long-term effects, and the well-being of our communities is in jeopardy as a result of that. So the question, how can we dismantle these things, right? And so it's not easy, right? It takes time. Obviously, I haven't moved very far in 400 years, but policy reforms, right? And as I go through the next 3 slides, because there's like 8 or 9 things here, I would love for you to kind of jot down and then put in the chat, where have you been active, or where do you think you can be active? So policy reforms such as reviewing and reforming policies, right? Implementing anti-discrimination and affirmative action policies, addressing issues like redlining, discriminatory lending practices. That's one way to dismantle systemic racism. Education and awareness, right? Promoting education awareness, integrating yourself with diverse perspectives and histories. There's a wonderful organization, and they are also on my resource, the Center for Healing Racism. And they are out of Texas. Cherry Steinwender is actually I have her book here. She is the author of this book, which is fabulous for children. It's called Bread is a Simple Food, Teaching Children About Cultures. It's adorable, but she's the executive director of the Center for Healing Racism in Texas. And they do online workshops and classes as well as in person. But I don't think any of you are from Texas, but you could go. They actually even do like a plantation visit for a weekend and talk about it from the level of racism, right? Because the idea is to heal racism. But also to encourage open dialogue. There's an organization that's called, I believe it's the Practice Circles, Free Practice Circles. I don't know if I put that on my resource list, but I'll get that for you. Where people sit in a room on Zoom and answer a question. So I attended one a few weeks ago, and it was, what are Republicans and Democrats in 2023? And people got to speak for 2 minutes, their answer, and then other people got to have a 1-minute follow-up question, clarification, or out of curiosity. I'm curious to know is the catchphrase. And it wasn't for the sake of arguing. I will tell you, my blood rushed a little bit, but I had to take a nice deep breath and go, okay, I'm in this circle, have conversations with different people so that I can understand an open dialogue. Okay. Another way to dismantle systemic racism is cultural competency training, right? Taking some classes in cultural competency, unconscious bias, even conflict resolution, right? Nonviolent communication, okay? Offering diverse representation is another way. Be an advocate wherever you work, wherever you are in school, wherever you are in your community, for greater representation of those in marginalized communities. Promote diversity. On my website, it's very clear for my own business. I have a statement on the bottom of every page that says, this is what I stand for. You can have a signature in your email, which is, I do that as well, acknowledging the land I live on, okay? Acknowledging whose voices are important, okay? Criminal justice reform. Go to different organizations in your community who are working on such issues. Volunteer an hour a month, 3 hours a month, whatever is possible for you. There's an organization here in the local Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, called Rise for Surge. Marisol, maybe you know it, you're here. I'll look it up. I always forget. Stand up for racial justice. It's something like that. If it's Surge, S-U-R-J. But there are a lot of organizations out there. And then support community policing and alternatives to incarceration. It doesn't have to be school to prison. It really doesn't, right? Economic equity, right? We talked about that quite a bit already, right? Speaking up for a coworker, helping promote. A lot of times people are quick to complain about their coworkers or their fellow students or whatever it is. Start catching the good. Start noticing the beauty in a person and compliment them, either to them or to their boss. I noticed so-and-so was just really attentive in the meeting today and really loved their presence. It was nice to have them there. the more we talk kindly about each other, right? Supporting our community. And I mean, that can also then in their workplace, put them in front for a promotion or a raise, right? Because nobody's noticing. They're noticing when people act out and react, but are people really noticing when there's beauty in the way somebody is eloquent and supports the mission? Voting rights, protect and expand voting rights. Far too many areas where gerrymandering is taking place and voter suppression, right? We saw what happened in Georgia and other states, right? People having to walk 7 hours to get to a polling place. That's ridiculous. And then being online for hours and the polling place closing before it was their turn. Not okay. That is a systemic issue, and we need to work towards changing that. Community engagement, right? There are a lot of grassroots organizations. If you can't volunteer time, but you have $5 a week you can give or $5 a month, you'd be surprised it can help, right? Okay. Accountability, another way to dismantle, okay, systemic racism. Hold institutions and individuals accountable. Establish independent oversight bodies to monitor. So maybe if you're at a university or you are at a workplace or you're in the community and education, find out what is happening to support the education of these students or people who haven't had this access before, right? Allyship and solidarity. It's funny, the word allyship in one of our webinars, we were asked to change it to active participant. So everybody has a different way of wanting to see things, right? And what it means to you. I find that everybody has to define things for themselves and then have a conversation. What's your definition of allyship? What's your definition, right? What does solidarity mean to you? And then continuous evaluation, really making sure that there's regular visibility and acknowledgement of what's happening in your community. Even having conversations with family members, that can be really hard. I know that my partner and I have had some times where having that conversation with her family is not easy, right? And because we have differences of opinion and upbringings and ways that we look at things. So I'd be curious to think, as you guys saw those different pieces, right? Policy reform, education awareness, cultural competency training, diverse representation, criminal justice reform, economic equity, voting rights, community engagement, accountability, continuous education and evaluation. What stands out for you as something that either you're already doing or you think you could participate in on a sustainable level? So some people will say, well, I can read and then tell people about what I've read. Okay, how often? When? I'd love to hear, and we always ask this at the end of our webinars, if people can share with us what is one piece of sustainable action that you are willing to commit to. Cultural competency trainings. If you have some examples of those, please feel free to put them in the chat for others. Thank you. So cultural competency trainings. What else? Who else has something that they would like to say, I'm willing to do this? When I first started these webinars, we did 3 in 1 week, and then we were doing them every week, and then it wasn't possible. So we moved it to once a month, and that has been very sustainable. That doesn't mean that's the only thing we do, but learning how to make it sustainable. Okay, restorative justice training, wonderful. Oh, you did one in nursing school on implicit bias. Awesome. Well, good. I'm glad they're required to do it. That's great. I don't think I realized that. Speak out the next time a family member makes a hateful comment instead of staying silent. Oh, I love that, Rachel. That's going to be hard. My heart is with you as you do that. And I think it's about identifying, what does it look like to speak out? How can you speak out in a way that is respectful of them and safe for you, right? And maybe it takes practicing. Like maybe you have some school friends that will practice with you to actually, okay, say this, even though it doesn't sound good, say it so I can, respond. And that's the other thing, is responding instead of reacting, right? When we actually react, we make it worse. And so the whole idea is to respond in a way that will can be heard. Now, this is a very challenging topic, because another kind of microaggression is telling someone, hey, don't talk to me with that tone. So be careful with that one. Read up on that if you need to know more about it. And KKL, speaking out to friends as well. It can be just as hard to address a friend's by, oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I 150% agree with you. Yeah. So yeah, so I really, you know, and that was the last picture of my slide was, what are you willing to do to participate in dismantling systemic racism? And I think, you know, feel free, please, to continue to come back. And I see somebody in the Facebook, I'm finally getting back to the Facebook. Great ideas, measurable actions. I want to add a land acknowledgement to my email signature. Oh, Jack, good to see that. I'd love to make that a standard for my agency. Yes, practice, practice. Absolutely. Thank you for participating in this conversation, Jack. So as we kind of come to a close, again, my apologies, we didn't have a guest tonight. I hope that you were able to take away something. I'm actually going to stop the recording and live stream for Facebook and that. And if there's anybody in the attendee part of the webinar, I would love to invite you to just come on screen with me, and we can talk about what's going through your minds. We can all talk about what's feeling frustrating, what's doable. And those of you in Facebook, YouTube land, I'm going to say goodbye to you. And again, those of you that are attendees, you'll get a follow-up email that will come to you with this huge list of resources. Okay. And so let me stop the recording. And